I caught my husband having lunch with his mistress. Instead of confronting them, I invited her husband to join us. "Enjoy your lunch," I told them as their faces turned white. The entire restaurant watched in silence as their perfect affair crumbled into divorce papers. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. Hello everyone. It's Audrey. Find a comfortable spot, maybe grab a cup of tea, because I need to talk to you all like your old friends sitting right here in my living room. I need to tell you a story about my life, about how the perfect picture I thought I was living in turned out to be a cheap forgery, painted over with lies. You know that moment, that gut-wrenching, stomach-dropping moment when you realize your husband's working late wasn't about closing deals, but about opening someone else's bedroom door? Yeah. That feeling. It's a physical thing, isn't it? A cold dread that starts in your toes and works its way up until it settles like a block of ice in your chest. Well, apparently, I was the only one in our little suburban town not invited to that particular open house. My name is Audrey Carmichael. I'm 58 now, but this all went down about 10 years ago, when I was 48. And if you think finding out your husband is cheating is the worst part, you're wrong. The worst part is the deception, the sheer audacity of it all. But the best part is when you get to write the final chapter yourself. So stick with me. Because I'm going to tell you about the dinner party I threw, a very, very exclusive party where the guest of honor was his mistress, and the surprise guest was her own husband. Spoiler alert, it wasn't a potluck. For 12 years, my life with Preston had been predictable. And I loved it. I craved the predictability. We lived in a lovely two-story colonial in a quiet suburb of Atlanta. We had the manicured lawn that Preston obsessed over every Saturday morning, the two-car garage with his golf clubs and my dusty gardening tools, the whole 9 yards. From the outside, we were the picture of stability. I even had a favorite armchair by the window in the living room, a place where I'd sit and watch him in the yard, and I'd feel this sense of deep, calming peace. This was my life. Solid. Secure. Preston was a real estate agent, a man I thought was as predictable as the sunrise. He ate the same bran flakes with exactly half a banana sliced on top for breakfast every morning. He complained about the same spot on the I-285 perimeter during his commute home. And every single night, without fail, he'd fall asleep on the couch by 10:15, the remote slipping from his hand as the local news anchor signed off. Our life wasn't a whirlwind romance anymore, not like in the beginning. I remember our 10th anniversary trip to Savannah. We walked for hours under the Spanish moss, held hands like teenagers, and ate in a tiny restaurant where we were the only customers. He looked at me across that flickering candlelight and said, "Audrey, this is it. You and me. Forever." I believed him. I held onto that memory like a precious stone. Now, our life was less candlelight and more fluorescent kitchen lighting. It was comfortable. A well-worn sweater. Our weekends were a cycle of Home Depot trips for his latest yard project and me trying out new recipes I'd seen on TV. We had our routines, our inside jokes that weren't really funny anymore, but we said them out of habit. I was a marketing director at a downtown firm, a job I loved, a career I had built from the ground up. I thought our biggest problem was him leaving his dirty socks next to the hamper instead of in it. God, what I wouldn't give to have that be my biggest problem again. I suppose the first crack in the painting was so small I almost missed it. It was a Tuesday night, I was at the kitchen table paying bills online, the usual monthly ritual. Preston was staring out the window into the dark backyard. "Don't you ever feel like you need a new space, Audrey?" he asked, his voice strangely distant. "Just something to shake things up?" I didn't even look up from the laptop. "The kitchen?" I asked. I saw a great deal on granite countertops at Lowe's. We could finally do that island you wanted. He turned from the window, and for a second, he just looked at me. Not with anger or love, but with nothing. A blankness I'd never seen before. "No, not that," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "I don't know. Just something different." He walked out of the room, leaving me with the bills and a sudden, inexplicable chill. That was the first time in a long time he'd sounded like a stranger. The conversation just drifted away, but the feeling, that little splinter of unease, it found a place to lodge itself deep inside my heart. After that night, things began to change. They were small at first, like tiny tremors before an earthquake. But they began to pile up, each one a little brick in a wall that was slowly being built between us. It began with his appearance. This is a man who, for our entire marriage, rotated between 3 blue button-down shirts for work. A man who considered a clean pair of khakis fancy pants. Suddenly, my predictable, slightly rumpled husband was trying to be Don Draper. A package from a ridiculously expensive men's store, a place I didn't even know he knew existed, arrived one afternoon. I signed for it, feeling the weight of the box. Inside was a silk blend blazer, the color of charcoal, and a price tag that made me gasp. I remember holding it up when he got home. The fabric felt foreign in my hands, slippery and cool. "What's this for, Preston?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Got a big new client?" He barely looked up from his phone, a habit that was becoming more and more frequent. "Oh, just trying to elevate my professional image. Gotta look the part to get the big listings, you know." His salary as a real estate agent depended heavily on commissions, so on the surface, it almost made sense. But in my gut, I knew. He wasn't dressing for clients. He was dressing for someone else. The only thing he was elevating was someone else's heart rate. The new cologne was next. For 12 years, he'd smelled like the same generic, clean aftershave. It was the scent of my husband. One morning, he walked out of the bathroom and the air changed. It was a deep, musky, expensive scent. It didn't belong in our quiet, suburban house. It smelled like secrets. "Is that new?" I asked, my voice a little tight. "Yeah, just a sample I got," he mumbled, grabbing his keys, already halfway out the door. He didn't offer to let me smell it on his wrist. He didn't look me in the eye. The red flags started piling up faster than Amazon packages at Christmas. Late-night client meetings at trendy downtown restaurants I'd never heard of. Weekend property viewings that somehow never resulted in a listing. He'd come home late on a Saturday, smelling faintly of wine and that expensive new cologne. "How'd it go?" I'd ask. "Oh, great. Great clients. Very demanding. Took forever." The lies were getting easier for him. Too easy. He even started listening to these self-improvement podcasts in the car. One day I got in to go to the store, and the Bluetooth connected automatically. A man's voice was booming from the speakers about unleashing your authentic self and breaking free from limiting beliefs. I just sat there in the driveway, listening. Nothing says midlife crisis like a 41-year-old real estate agent discovering authenticity through adultery. I turned it off, a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't my husband anymore. This was a stranger, and I was determined to find out who he was spending his time with. Here's the thing you should know about me. I'm not the type to cry into a glass of wine and hope things get better. I've spent my entire career in marketing. I craft campaigns, I analyze data, I look for patterns, and I spot inconsistencies. When a product isn't selling, you don't just wring your hands and hope for the best, you find out why. My marriage was a failing product, and I was going to find out why. The breaking point came on a Thursday. He called me at 4 p.m. "Hey, babe. Going to be late tonight. Got a last-minute showing with that couple from New York. Might have to take them for a quick dinner to seal the deal." His voice was smooth, practiced. "Don't wait up for me." I said, "Okay, honey." Good luck, and hung up. I stood in the kitchen, the phone feeling heavy and cold in my hand. And I knew. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that he was lying. There was no couple from New York. So, that night, after he'd finally rolled in around 11, giving me a vague story about traffic and indecisive buyers, I waited. I waited for the sound of his light snoring from our bedroom. Then, I went to my home office, closed the door, and opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for a shoulder to cry on, I was looking for ammunition. The first stop, our shared phone bill. Before anyone judges me, let me be clear, I'm the one who paid the bills in our house. My name was on the account right next to his. It's not snooping when you're literally paying for the evidence of your own betrayal. I logged into the carrier's website, my heart thumping a nervous, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I felt like a criminal in my own home. I clicked on the latest statement, and the PDF slowly loaded, the blue circle spinning, spinning, spinning. Each rotation felt like an eternity. And then, there it was. Holy moly. It wasn't a smoking gun, it was a cannon. It wasn't even hidden. It was right there in black and white, a spreadsheet of my heartbreak. A number I didn't recognize. It appeared over and over and over again. Hundreds and hundreds of texts. Not just a few, but a constant stream every single day, mostly between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. And the calls. Long calls. 45 minutes. 58 minutes. An hour and 12 minutes. Always right around lunchtime, or late in the afternoon, the times he was supposed to be showing properties to those demanding clients. I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck, a prickling heat of pure rage. This wasn't a suspicion anymore. This was data. This was a pattern. This was proof. My hands were shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. The emotional, hurt wife part of me wanted to storm into the bedroom and scream. But the marketing director, the strategist, took over. She was cold. She was methodical. And she was about to go to work. The detective work was almost too easy. I copied the number from the phone bill. My mouse was shaking so badly I had to do it twice. I opened a new tab in my browser and pasted the 10 digits into the search bar. My fingers hovered over the enter key. This was it. This was the moment where everything would change. There was no going back after this. I took a deep, shuddering breath and clicked. The first result was a reverse phone lookup service. I didn't hesitate. I pulled out my credit card and paid the $5. The screen buffered for a moment, and then a name popped up, Corinne Finch. Corinne. Of course her name was Corinne. It sounded like something you'd name a character in a cheap romance novel, the kind with a windswept heroine on the cover who has an inexplicable ability to renovate Victorian houses. A quick LinkedIn search gave me the rest of the picture. Corinne Finch, 34, was an interior designer with her own boutique firm. Her profile picture was a masterpiece of curated perfection. She was laughing, head tilted back just so, with perfectly blown-out blonde hair that seemed to catch the light in a way that normal human hair just doesn't. She had that kind of aggressively white smile that said, I drink green smoothies and I definitely steal other people's husbands as a hobby. Her bio was full of fluffy nonsense about her passion for creating beautiful spaces for beautiful people. Apparently, my husband's king-sized bed, the one I picked out the sheets for, now counted as one of her projects. I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated rage, so intense it made me feel dizzy. I wanted to throw my laptop against the wall. But I didn't. I kept digging. Because here's where it gets interesting. Here's where the story takes a turn. Corinne Finch wasn't just some random homewrecker. She was a married homewrecker. Her husband was a man named Garrett Finch. A quick jump from her profile to his told me everything I needed to know. He was a graphic designer, and his Instagram was a public shrine to their perfect life. There were pictures of them hiking, their arms around each other on a mountain top. Pictures from a trip to Italy, him looking at her with pure adoration as she held up a glass of wine. Anniversary posts that would make Hallmark cards jealous. He commented on every single one of her posts with heart emojis and gushing compliments. My beautiful, talented wife, changing the world one living room at a time, he wrote under a picture of her standing in a kitchen she'd designed. I scrolled through his feed, a voyeur of a life I was about to detonate. And looking at his kind, unsuspecting face, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a pang of pity for this stranger. We were in the same sinking boat, and he didn't even know it was taking on water. And in that moment, sitting alone in the dark of my office, a new feeling began to bloom alongside the rage and the pain. It was the cold, sharp, and exhilarating feeling of an idea. A terrible, brilliant idea. Now, here's where most wives would confront their cheating husbands. There would be tears, accusations, probably a thrown lamp or two. A messy, ugly scene in the kitchen that would end with him either lying his way out of it or packing a bag. But I'm not most wives. I've spent my entire career crafting campaigns that get people's attention. I sell ideas. I manage perceptions. And honey, I was about to launch the marketing campaign of my lifetime. The plan started forming faster than you could say divorce. Yelling and screaming felt unsatisfying. It would give Preston the chance to lie, to gaslight me, to turn it all around and somehow make it my fault. We've just been so distant lately, Audrey. I could already hear it. No. I didn't want a messy fight behind closed doors. I wanted a public execution. I wanted to strip away the one thing that made their affair exciting, the secrecy. Affairs thrive on secrets, lies, and the illicit thrill of getting away with something. Take away the secrecy, and what's left? Not a passionate romance. Just two selfish, middle-aged people destroying 4 lives for a few moments of feeling special. But to do that, I needed intel. I needed to know their routine. So, the next Thursday, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called in sick to work, citing a sudden migraine. The only migraine I had was my husband. I got in my car, put on a baseball cap and sunglasses, and drove downtown. I felt like a character in a bad spy movie. I parked in a garage across the street from a trendy, overpriced steakhouse called the Capitol Grill, a place Preston and I had been to once for an anniversary and he'd complained about the bill for a week. I sat there, sipping a lukewarm coffee from a thermos, and I waited. And sure enough, at 12:30 on the dot, Preston's silver BMW pulled up. He got out, looking around nervously before heading inside. 5 minutes later, a pristine white Lexus pulled up. Corinne. She swept into the restaurant like she owned the place. I stayed for an hour, my heart a cold, hard lump in my chest. From my vantage point, I could just see them through the large front window. They were in a corner booth. They were laughing. At one point, I saw him reach across the table and touch her hand. And that's when the most beautiful, diabolical idea hit me. A fully formed, multi-platform, integrated marketing campaign of revenge. If they wanted to play house, I was going to give them the full family experience. But first, I needed to get in touch with the other victim in this little soap opera. I needed to meet Garrett Finch. Garrett's LinkedIn profile showed he worked at a creative agency just 10 minutes from my own office. He specialized in brand identity and digital design. Perfect. It was a legitimate business pretext. My mind, the one I used every day to solve marketing problems for my clients, went into overdrive. I spent the next 2 days crafting the perfect email. It couldn't sound desperate. It couldn't sound fake. It had to be professional, intriguing, and completely, utterly innocent. I wrote a draft. It was too eager. I deleted it. I wrote another. Too formal. Deleted. Finally, after an hour of careful wordsmithing, I had it. It was a masterpiece of corporate subterfuge. I introduced myself as Audrey Carmichael, marketing director at a top Atlanta firm. I mentioned, a small, flattering lie, that I had been following his agency's work for a while. I said we were launching a new campaign for a major client and were looking for a freelance graphic designer with his specific skill set. The crucial part was the last paragraph. I wrote, "Hello, Garrett. My name is Audrey Carmichael, and I'm the marketing director at Sterling Group. I came across your portfolio online and was incredibly impressed with your brand identity work, particularly on the Ridgeway account. My firm is in the early stages of developing a new national campaign for a major beverage client, and we are looking for a designer with your clean, sophisticated aesthetic. I know this is out of the blue, but I was wondering if you might be available for a brief exploratory lunch next week to discuss the project. My schedule is most open on Thursday. How would 12:30 p.m. at the Capitol Grill downtown work for you? I've heard great things about their business lunch atmosphere and it's centrally located. Let me know if this is a possibility. Best. Audrey Carmichael." I read it over a dozen times. It was perfect. The mention of a specific account showed I'd done my homework. The beverage client was vague enough to be believable. And the location, so innocent, so central, so perfect. I attached a link to my own real LinkedIn profile to add to my credibility. Then, with a deep breath, I hit send. The wait was agonizing. Every time my phone buzzed with a new email, my stomach clenched. I went through the motions at work, sitting in meetings about brand synergy and market penetration, while all I could think about was my own personal marketing campaign, which I'd secretly titled Operation Family Reunion. 2 hours later, an email popped into my inbox. The subject line, Design Project Inquiry. It was from him. My hands were shaking as I clicked it open. He wrote back, "Hello Audrey, thank you so much for reaching out. I'm a great admirer of your firm's work, so this is quite a pleasant surprise. I would be delighted to discuss your project over lunch. The Capitol Grill sounds perfect. My wife actually mentioned it just the other day, said she'd had a great client meeting there. Thursday at 12:30 works perfectly for me. Looking forward to meeting you. Best, Garrett." I had to read that line twice. My wife actually mentioned it just the other day. Oh, Garrett. Sweet, clueless Garrett. The business lunch atmosphere was about to get very, very interesting. The mouse had taken the cheese. The trap was set. The week leading up to Operation Family Reunion was the longest week of my life. It was like preparing for the Olympics of passive-aggressive warfare. And let me tell you, I was going for the gold. At home, Preston was putting on an Academy Award-worthy performance as the devoted husband. He'd started this new thing where he'd kiss my forehead before leaving for work, a gesture so fake it almost made me laugh. He was trying to absolve himself of his sins through small, meaningless gestures. The Tuesday before the big day, he came home with flowers. A huge, ostentatious bouquet of red roses that screamed, "I am consumed by guilt." "What's the occasion?" I asked, my voice a perfect symphony of surprise and delight. I took the bouquet from him, making sure to brush my hand against his. He flashed that smile that used to make my heart skip a beat, but now just made my eye twitch. Can't a man buy his beautiful wife flowers just because? Of course, honey. They're lovely, I said. I went to the kitchen to find a vase. As I filled it with water and snipped the stems, my hands were shaking, not with sadness, but with a cold, controlled fury. I was arranging his guilt in a crystal vase. But the universe has a wicked, wicked sense of humor. Because the very next day, Wednesday, the day before our scheduled family introduction, Preston came home with a story that almost made me choke on my Chardonnay. He was unbuttoning his collar, looking pleased with himself. "You'll never believe the day I had," he said, pouring himself a drink. I was showing that house on Peachtree, the big colonial. The seller's interior designer was there doing the final staging. She is brilliant, Audrey. Absolutely brilliant. I froze, my wine glass halfway to my lips. Oh yeah? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Yeah. She has this incredible eye. She was talking about how to make a space feel more intimate. He was looking off into the distance, a dreamy expression on his face, probably remembering whatever personal touches Corinne had been giving him. The audacity of this man, to come home and essentially brag to me about his affair while disguising it as a work story, was next-level narcissism. But I played along. I was a professional, after all. Wow, she sounds amazing, I said, taking a slow sip of wine. What's her firm's name? Maybe I'll look her up. He immediately tensed. Oh, I don't remember. Finch something? I don't know. Finch? I said, feigning thoughtfulness. That's a nice name. Well, she sounds like she really knows what she's doing. Maybe we should hire her for our place sometime. Preston nearly dropped his glass. Oh. No, I don't think, she's probably really expensive. Very high-end. And our house is fine. It's fine the way it is. Sure, Preston, I said, smiling. Our house is fine. I went to bed that night lying next to him as he slept peacefully, the liar. I, on the other hand, was wide awake, going over every detail of the plan in my head. I was no longer just a wife. I was a strategist on the eve of battle. Thursday morning arrived with a kind of dreadful, electric energy in the air. At 6 a.m., Preston's alarm went off. He went through his usual routine, but there was a spring in his step, an eagerness that told me he was looking forward to his day, specifically, to 12:30 p.m. As he was adjusting his tie in the mirror, the expensive charcoal-colored one I'd never seen before, I walked up behind him, resting my chin on his shoulder. Big day today? I asked innocently. He met my eyes in the reflection. Just the usual. Few showings, couple of client meetings. You know how it is, he said, turning to kiss my forehead. The gesture felt rehearsed, hollow. I wondered if he practiced these lies in the mirror. Well, have a great lunch, I said, putting just enough emphasis on the word lunch to make him pause for a fraction of a second. He frowned. Lunch? Yeah, I said, breezing past him to the closet. Don't you usually grab lunch around 12:30? You've been eating out a lot lately. Just want to make sure you're eating something healthy. His recovery was smooth. I'll give him that. Oh, right. Yeah, probably just a quick sandwich between appointments. Nothing special. Nothing special. I smiled to myself as I heard the garage door open. I was about to show him exactly how special his lunch was going to be. After he left, I took my time getting ready. This wasn't just lunch, it was a performance. I laid out 3 different outfits on the bed. The red dress? Too aggressive. The floral blouse? Too soft. I settled on the navy blazer, a crisp white shirt, tailored slacks, and my lucky heels, the ones I wore to presentations where I absolutely had to nail it. I needed to look like a successful businesswoman, not a scorned wife planning revenge. As I did my makeup, I felt like I was putting on armor. A little extra mascara. A bold, confident red lipstick. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman I hadn't seen in a while. She looked focused. She looked powerful. She looked dangerous. At 11:45, I was in my car, driving toward downtown Atlanta. The radio was playing some forgettable pop song, but all I could hear was the thumping of my own heart. I was driving toward the moment that would either vindicate 12 years of marriage or confirm that I'd wasted the better part of my 30s on a man whose idea of problem-solving was adding more problems. Either way, lunch was going to be unforgettable. I arrived at the restaurant at 12:15, exactly 15 minutes early. I had learned from my surveillance mission that parking was a nightmare, so I had already reserved a spot in the garage across the street. As I walked toward the entrance, I spotted Preston's silver BMW, parked ineptly behind a delivery truck. Amateur. The hostess, a perfectly polished young woman who probably practiced her smile in the mirror, greeted me. Table for one? Actually, I'm meeting someone, I said smoothly, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. Garrett Finch. We have a reservation for 12:30. She checked her tablet. Of course. Right this way. Your guest hasn't arrived yet, but we'll get you settled. She led me to a perfect table for two. It wasn't a booth, but a freestanding table with two chairs, set right in the main thoroughfare. A table with a direct, unimpeded sightline to the corner booth where Preston and Corinne conducted their little illicit matinees. The booth was empty, but I knew it wouldn't be for long. They were creatures of habit. I ordered a sparkling water with lime. I needed to keep my wits sharp. I casually surveyed the restaurant. It was the usual mix of men in suits talking loudly about their promotion and wealthy women who treated lunch like a competitive sport. At exactly 12:25, Preston walked in. Right on schedule. He was wearing that expensive new blazer. He looked around nervously, which was new. Usually, he strutted into restaurants like he owned them. He was seated at their usual booth and immediately started checking his phone with the focused intensity of a man waiting for a very important text. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was sitting 20 feet away from my husband, waiting for another man to join me for lunch, and Preston had absolutely no idea. At 12:28, Garrett Finch walked through the door. I have to admit, photos didn't do him justice. He was tall, maybe 6 feet 2 inches, with the kind of genuine, kind smile that suggested he still believed the world was a fundamentally good place. My heart ached for him, for what I was about to put him through. Almost. He spotted me and walked over, hand extended. His handshake was firm, his eye contact direct. Ms. Carmichael? I'm Garrett. Thank you so much for thinking of me for this project. Please, call me Audrey, I said, smiling warmly. And thank you for being so flexible with the meeting location. Are you kidding? I've been wanting to try this place forever, he said enthusiastically as he sat down. My wife's always talking about how they have the best business lunch atmosphere in the city. Oh, Garrett. Your wife talks about this place because she's been here every Thursday for the past month, just not for business. Your wife has good taste, I said, my eyes glancing over his shoulder toward Preston's booth just as Corinne made her grand entrance. And what an entrance it was. She swept in like she was on a red carpet, all flowing hair in carefully calculated casual elegance. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my car payment. Preston's face lit up like a Christmas tree. He stood up to greet her with a hug that lasted just a few seconds too long for business associates. They settled into their booth, laughing at some shared secret. And just as I was steeling myself for the next step, Garrett, who had been looking around the restaurant, suddenly froze. Excuse me, he said, his voice dropping. But, isn't that my wife? My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the polite chatter of the restaurant. But I kept my voice perfectly calm, a practiced mask of casual surprise. Your wife? Where? I asked, pretending to scan the room. Right there, he said, pointing with his chin. The blonde woman who just sat down in that booth. Yeah, that's Corinne. What a coincidence. She must be here with a client. He was already starting to raise his hand to wave at her, a big, friendly, innocent gesture that would have detonated my entire plan. I had about 3 seconds to act. I reached across the table and placed my hand gently on his arm. Garrett, wait. He looked at me, his smile faltering as he registered the seriousness in my eyes. What is it? Is something wrong? Before you go over there, I said, looking him straight in the eye, my grip on his arm firm but gentle. Can I ask you something? Sure, of course, he said, his brow furrowing in confusion. The hand he had started to raise slowly lowered to the table. How long have you and Corinne been married? I asked, my voice low and steady. 5 years in June, he answered automatically, the confusion on his face deepening. Why do you? He paused, his expression shifting. He was smart. I could see the gears turning in his head as he connected the dots, my strange intensity, my hand on his arm, his wife sitting intimately close to another man across the room. Is everything okay, Audrey? This was it. The moment of truth. The point of no return. I could either chicken out, pull my hand back, and pretend this was all a terrible coincidence. Or I could light the fuse. I looked at Garrett's trusting, worried face. Then I looked over at my husband and his mistress, who were now leaning in close, giggling over their illegal lunch date. I made my choice. Garrett, I began, taking a deep breath. I need to tell you something, and I need you to try to stay calm when I do. His entire body tensed. He didn't say anything. He just watched me, his eyes wide with a dawning dread. I spoke the words as gently as I could, but they felt like stones dropping into a quiet pool. The man your wife is having lunch with, that's my husband, Preston Carmichael. And Garrett, this isn't a business meeting. I watched the color drain from his face. It was like watching a building crumble in slow motion. His eyes darted from me to the booth and back again, his mind desperately trying to process an impossible reality. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. What? He finally whispered, the word barely audible. Are you saying, they're having an affair? For at least a month, I confirmed, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. Probably longer. Every Thursday. 12:30, this exact table. He stared at them, his mind clearly racing, replaying the last few months of lies. But she said she was meeting a client, he stammered, shaking his head in disbelief. She's been so busy with new projects lately, working late. Weekend consultations with married men tend to be very time-consuming, I said, a bit more sharply than I intended. He looked back at me, his eyes full of a raw, shattered pain that I recognized all too well. It was the look of someone watching their entire world burn down around them. He was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he looked at me, the hurt in his eyes slowly being replaced by something else, cold, hard clarity. You orchestrated this, he said. It wasn't a question. This wasn't a coincidence. You invited me here, at this exact time, just to expose them. Orchestrated makes it sound so dramatic, I said with a small, mirthless smile. I simply arranged for the right people to be in the right place at the right time. The truth was going to come out eventually. I just gave it a little, scheduling assistance. He looked over at the booth again, at his smiling, laughing, cheating wife. And when he looked back at me, his jaw was set. He straightened his shoulders, and in that moment, I saw the strength I'd hoped was there. Let's go meet my wife's new friend, he said, his voice hard as steel. Walking those 20 feet across the restaurant felt like the longest journey of my life. The air grew thick, the cheerful clinking of cutlery and a nearby diner's loud laugh sounding distorted and far away. Every step was deliberate, a slow march toward the detonation. But as we approached that corner booth, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, a terrifying, exhilarating surge of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. Preston saw me first. I will never forget the expression on his face. It was a symphony of shock, horror, and guilt, all playing out in the space of 3 seconds. His eyes went wide, his jaw dropped, and his face turned a shade of red that perfectly matched the expensive Merlot he'd ordered to impress his lunch companion. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a freight train. Corinne was mid-sentence, probably saying something devastatingly clever about throw pillows, when she noticed Preston's sudden paralysis. She followed his terrified gaze, and when her eyes met mine, the temperature in the restaurant seemed to drop 10 degrees. A flicker of confusion, then annoyance. But the real magic happened when she saw Garrett standing right next to me, his 6 feet 2 inches frame casting a long shadow over their little table. If Preston looked like he'd been caught with his pants down, Corinne looked like she'd been caught burning down the house and was still holding the matches. Well, I said, my voice dripping with a fake, saccharine cheerfulness that was far more menacing than shouting would have been. I slid into their booth uninvited, forcing a flustered Preston to scoot over like a scolded child. What a delightful coincidence running into you two here. Garrett remained standing, a silent, imposing judge. Preston, darling, I continued, my smile never wavering. I'd like you to meet Garrett Finch. Garrett, this is my husband, Preston. Preston managed a weak, strangled noise and offered a clammy hand, which Garrett ignored. And Corinne, I said, turning my bright, predatory smile on her. Her face was ashen. I believe you already know Garrett. You know, your husband. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a breadcrumb drop. The couple at the next table stopped discussing their quarterly projections. The waiter, who had been approaching with a bread basket, froze mid-step and then slowly backed away. We were the center of our own terrible, wonderful stage. Corinne finally found her voice, though it came out about 3 octaves higher than normal. Garrett! Baby! What are you doing here? Having lunch, he replied, his voice dangerously calm, dangerously level. With Audrey. We were discussing a business project. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a steak knife. Business project? Corinne looked between us, her mind frantically trying to compute an outcome that wasn't a total catastrophe. A marketing campaign, I explained helpfully, leaning forward conspiratorially. I need a new graphic designer. And Garrett comes highly recommended. Although, now that I think about it, I should probably ask you both for references. I mean, you seem to know each other so well. Preston finally snapped out of his stupor, saying possibly the stupidest thing in the history of stupid things. Audrey, what are you doing here? I'm having lunch with Garrett, I repeated slowly, as if to a small child. The real question is, what are you doing here, Preston? I thought you had property showings this afternoon with that couple from New York. This is a client meeting, he blurted out, his face slick with sweat. Before I could tear that pathetic lie to shreds, Garrett delivered the final, devastating blow. He looked directly at Corinne, his voice devoid of all emotion, cold and clear for the entire restaurant to hear. Actually, Corinne, I am curious about these Thursday projects you've been so busy with. Especially since you told me this morning that you were working with a new female client who needed help with her master bedroom. That did it. The master bedroom comment hit the table like a nuclear bomb. Preston actually choked on his water, sputtering into his napkin. Corinne looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. The dam burst, and the ugly, sordid truth came flooding out. Garrett didn't need to say another word. He just looked at her, his face a mask of cold disappointment that was far worse than any rage. He turned, and without a backward glance, walked out of the restaurant. I stood up, smoothing my skirt and picking up my purse with a dignity I didn't feel but was determined to project. I looked down at my cheating husband and his mistress, 2 pathetic figures frozen in their public humiliation. Enjoy your lunch, I told them, my voice clear and steady. I hope it was worth it. And with that, I walked away, leaving them to deal with the wreckage of their choices, the stares of an entire restaurant, and a check for 2 meals they probably couldn't even taste anymore. I stepped outside into the bright Atlanta sun, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. If you've listened this far, please do me a favor and hit that like button, and comment with the number 1 down below. It lets me know you've given me a like, and it tells me you're here with me on this journey. Your support is a bigger encouragement than you can possibly imagine. Just comment with the number 1, and then I'll tell you what happened next. The aftermath of our little restaurant reunion played out exactly like a badly written soap opera, except with significantly higher legal fees. The silence in the car on the way home that evening was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Preston tried to talk. He tried to apologize. He tried to lie. I just turned up the radio. He moved out 3 days later. It was a miserable Saturday. I sat in the living room, drinking coffee, while he packed his things into boxes. We didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. I watched him pack his expensive new blazers and his stupid self-help books. When he was done, he stood in the doorway, a suitcase in his hand. Audrey, he started. I just shook my head and looked away. The finality of the door clicking shut was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. He rented a sad little studio apartment in Midtown, the kind of place 25-year-olds live when they're still figuring out their lives. It seemed fitting for a 41-year-old man who had just torched his own. Our divorce was surprisingly fast. The day after he left, I called the best lawyer in Atlanta. I walked into her office, a warrior walking into her war room. It turns out, having concrete evidence of infidelity, backed by a restaurant full of witnesses, makes property division negotiations significantly more favorable. My lawyer was a shark in a Chanel suit. We discovered Preston had been using a joint credit card to pay for his little dates, for gifts for Corinne. Turns out judges don't look kindly on husbands who spend marital assets on romantic dinners with other people's wives. In the end, I kept the house. As for Corinne, she vanished. Her boutique design firm's website was taken down. Her social media went dark. I heard through the grapevine that she packed up her white Lexus and moved to Portland 2 weeks after our restaurant encounter. She told everyone she'd gotten a better job opportunity. The translation was clear: she couldn't handle living in a city where her name had become a punchline. Preston tried calling me several times, his messages oscillating between pathetic, blubbering apologies and indignant accusations that I'd humiliated him unnecessarily. His final voicemail was a masterpiece of deflection. I saved it. It said, "Audrey, what you did was cruel and calculated. I made mistakes, yes, but you chose public humiliation over trying to work on our marriage. That says something about your character, too." Sometimes, when I need a good laugh, I play it back and marvel at the mental gymnastics required to make yourself the victim when you're caught cheating. 2 weeks after the restaurant incident, I was sitting in my now quiet house, trying to figure out how to be a person again, when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe right. Hello? Audrey? It's Garrett Finch. My heart skipped a beat. I expected him to be angry, to blame me for blowing up his life so publicly. But he wasn't. I wanted to thank you, he said, his voice quiet but steady. We met for coffee the next day. He looked tired, but the kindness was still there in his eyes. He told me that Corinne's cheating was just the tip of the iceberg in what he described as the most toxic marriage this side of a reality TV show. For years, she had systematically undermined his confidence, convincing him his graphic design business was just a cute hobby and that his artistic vision was commercially unrealistic. She'd isolated him from friends, criticized his appearance, and made him believe he was lucky to have her attention. He had been living in a prison and hadn't even realized it. You didn't just expose an affair, Audrey, he told me, stirring his coffee. You gave me my life back. The more Garrett and I talked, initially about legal strategies, then just about everything, the more I realized we'd both been married to emotional vampires. We started meeting for coffee once a week. It became our little ritual, a support system for two people navigating the messy, paper-filled world of divorce simultaneously. One day, I was complaining about a marketing campaign at work that was failing. The visuals were stale, uninspired. My promotion to senior director was on the line. Garrett listened patiently, then said, "Can I see it?" I showed him the mock-ups on my laptop. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "This is all wrong. The whole concept is weak." Then he pulled out a napkin and a pen, and in 5 minutes, he sketched out an idea that was so simple, so elegant, and so brilliant, it took my breath away. That's when I saw his portfolio. The work that Corinne had called a cute hobby was genius. It was exactly the kind of fresh, dynamic work my firm desperately needed. It was a huge risk, but I went to my board. I pitched Garrett. I showed them his work. They hired him for the project on a freelance basis. That campaign wasn't just a success, it was a phenomenon. It won industry awards. Our client was ecstatic. My bosses were thrilled, and I got my promotion. Garrett's photography and design elevated our work beyond anything we'd achieved before. Our client retention rate increased by 35% that year. But more than that, watching Garrett rediscover his confidence was like witnessing someone learn to breathe again. He quit his soul-crushing agency job and, with the buzz from our campaign, started his own successful firm. He was quickly becoming one of the most sought-after designers in the city. We were both healing, both rebuilding. And somewhere in that process, our weekly coffee meetings turned into dinners. Our business calls started to include conversations about our days, our dreams. The friendship evolved into something deeper. It wasn't a desperate rebound romance of two wounded people. It was the steady, mature connection of two adults who had been through hell and had learned what they actually wanted, and what they deserved, in a partner. Last month, Garrett and I moved in together. We used a small inheritance my grandmother had left me years ago, which I'd saved for a rainy day, combined with his savings, to buy a beautiful house with big windows, a garden for me, and a light-filled studio for him. We host dinner parties where our friends actually enjoy each other's company, where nobody's walking on eggshells. Sometimes I think about that day at the Capitol Grill. I don't feel anger anymore. I just feel gratitude. It's a strange thing to say, isn't it? To be grateful for the worst day of your life. But that day set me free. Who would have thought that discovering your husband's affair could lead to discovering your own worth? It turns out, life gets remarkably easier when you're partnered with someone who actually wants to see you succeed. So, to anyone out there listening who feels stuck, who feels betrayed, who feels like their life is over, I want you to hear this: sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting better. It's building a life so full of joy and success and peace that you barely have time to look back. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And let me know your thoughts in the comments. It means the world to know I'm not alone in this. Take care of yourselves.